So, hello and welcome to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to talk about the Druids of Britain and Ireland, their connection to the trees, the land, and of course, the stone circles, these megalithic structures that they built. And I am joined with my incredible brother today, Stephen. So, how you doing, Steve?
Hello, Zach. I'm doing very well, and I hope you're well as well.
Very good, my brother. So first and foremost, let's give a bit of a breakdown of the history and the time period of when these druids training and these druids were kind of fully active on the British Isles and Ireland.
Well, this is a very wide-ranging subject. So again, we had to look at the conventionality of Western science in regards to both archaeology and different elements, shall we say, of anthropology when it comes to studying the Irish Druids and the British Druids, and in how there should be really a definable timeline as to when they emerged, both in what is now known as the United Kingdom of Great Britain, at the time was known as Albion or Britain, and Ireland at the time was known as Arian. So we need to kind of set aside what we've been given, we could even say indoctrinated within schools, colleges, and universities in terms of a timeline for the emergence of the teachings, the cultural influences, and the training of the Irish Druids and the British Druids. So from what I have researched, it appears that around 850 BC through to about 840 BC, there was the emergence in both Britain and in Ireland what appears to be the Druidic schools and Druidic colleges. We know that when it comes to the training that was taking place, whether it was for a Druid or a Druidess, there was around 20 years of training that was required. Now, these were all orally or verbally passed on. Nothing was written down.
Wow.
This immediately suggests that all Druids, whether they were from Ireland or from Britain, had an incredible cognitive ability to memorize vast quantities of knowledge. So the various subjects that the Irish Druids and the British Druids were taught in that 20 years of training, I would like just to say as a side note to that females were perceived equally to the male students that were training to become Druids or Druidic priests in Ireland or Britain.
So there was
So
there was a lot of female druids as well, because we always get this perception that the druids
yeah,
were all men. That's
yeah,
the way
there
they're
was
portrayed.
that's right. So from about 850 BC onwards, maybe 840 BC onwards, we know that there was anything from around probably 92,000 to about 94,000 or thereabouts students at the highest levels that were actually coming from around various countries on planet Earth and sailing to here to what we can class as Albion or Britain and Ireland for training as Druidic priests. The subjects that they were learning sort of ranged from the development of astronomy, understanding of naturopathy, having a profound understanding of mathematics, sacred geometry, and medicine, and many other very important subjects. So you can see automatically from that statement that Irish Druids and British Druids would have been revered, they would have been exalted globally in many nations of planet Earth as extremely unique individuals because they were the most knowledgeable individuals on planet Earth at that time.
Hmm.
There were no kings, no queens or princes or any other individual from regality that had anywhere near the amount of knowledge that the Irish Druids and the British Druids had. So they, in many ways they were revered. In some ways they were perceived suspiciously, especially by the various royal houses of the different nations of planet Earth that were fully aware of the potential and the influences that Irish Druids and British Druids had, not just over their students, but obviously in Ireland with the various Celtic tribes and obviously the Celtic Britons here in Albion or Britain. So we know that they were a very much an integral part of the ancient historical outlook of planet Earth, and they had many cultural influences that were passed on even to some of the Greek philosophers. Much of their knowledge was also, shall we say, absorbed or integrated by the Roman Empire. They weren't, shall we say, they weren't acknowledged by Roman philosophers, Roman polymaths, in any way as being the individuals or groupings of individuals who had influenced or had knowledge taken from them that had been then constituted into the various schools and colleges of the Roman Empire. So that is very interesting to note that they were seen with such reverence, but also with such suspicion that they couldn't even be acknowledged for the potential and the influences they held. So the Irish Druids and the British Druids were very specialized individuals. Their training was unique. As I said, it was orally or verbally passed down over 20 years of training. You can imagine how intense that training was.
Mm.
So the timeline for their existences and their cultural influences over the Celtic tribes of Ireland, the Celtic Britons of Albion, and the Gaulish Celts of France, of Belgium, and parts of Germany and Northern Europe have never been historically acknowledged, academically recognized by Western science in any way whatsoever. So what we're given when it comes to the idea of Irish Druidism and British Druidism is these individuals that wore long white robes. They had gold and silver looking tassels. They had a golden sickle, and they worship various tree species. What they don't tell you is, for example, that when it comes to Irish folklore and many aspects of Welsh folklore, we know there was a much deeper connection between different tree species, not just the oak tree, but many other tree species and shrubs also, for the Irish Druids and the British Druids. And what is known in the Gaelic language or the Irish language is the Tianga Ogamak, which means furrow maker language. Now, some individuals who are watching this Sacred Wisdom podcast may have some familiarity with the Tianga Ogamak or the furrow maker language, which is where certain notches, numerical notches, were placed into sequence. And these represented various tree species, but they actually created with specific types of golden lyres or golden harps that many of the Irish Druids and the British Druids used to create specific types of resonant sound or specific frequencies and vibrations of sound. Now, how that interconnects with those trees is, from what I've researched from Irish folklore and Welsh folklore, and from my own psychic and supernatural experiences that have been very profound, is that the actual Irish Druids and the British Druids were able to access the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane by using specific tree species that had specific types of resonances that were growing on geomagnetic ley lines, specifically over dimensional vortices that intersected, that they could then access to converse with, we can say, perhaps light beings or spirit guides from the astral plane to enrich and to further discern their own types of knowledge, which really, in a way, could be defined as Druidic occultism.
And that was the oak tree, in the sense that was the main tree that was representative of the actual Druids, right?
Well,
And
hence why it's the royal oak.
Of
it's
course,
the master tree.
Yes.
And if you take a look at the oak, the broad oak, if you take a look at when it's fully grown and it's allowed to grow to its fullest size, in the way it should do. You look at the crown of an oak tree, it's very broad and wide. It reaches out in many directions into the skyline. The trunk is straight, it's broad, and the roots are very, very deep. So this represented to the Irish Druids and the British Druids, as well as all those who were training their students, ranging from maybe 92,000 to 94,000, maybe reaching at some points perhaps over 100,000 or more students at the height of the training that was going on both in Ireland and Albion or Britain for these individuals. It would be an integral part of the teaching to discuss the oak tree and the symbolism of the oak tree.
Now, what from your research, what would they have learned from that oak tree, and how would they have interacted with it? Just for example, for the
So in
audience.
terms of human psychology, there's many aspects to why it was used in an analogical sense and in an archetypal sense, and therefore also symbolically. And that is the broad oak, or the oak tree, from the perspective of the Irish Druids and the British Druids, represented a divine trinity within Mother Nature. So because of the deep roots, this represented the subconscious mind. The trunk represented the actual access route or conduit between the underworld or the subterranean regions
And the tree was
inside Mother Earth, and therefore the subconscious mind.
Mm.
And it represented the conscious mind, which is obviously, in a sense, is the psychological link between the subconscious. And the crown of the oak tree, the royal oak, the master tree, was seen as the crown of knowledge, the crown of self-realization, or the super consciousness that could be obtained through understanding Mother Nature as divine symbolism, again, as an ecological and an environmental set of signs and indications of the majestic resonance and eloquence of the universal creator of heaven and earth. Because the other aspect to this is that Irish Druids and British Druids had a monotheistic religion. That means they worshipped the universal creator as God, the infinite oneness, the infinite nowness of the physical universe. But underneath that monotheistic religion was a polytheistic set of different astral deities that were also worshipped, obviously, which we can see from Irish mythology, Irish folklore, Welsh mythology, and Welsh folklore in a very intense and passionate and devout way by the various Celtic peoples. So we know that the broad oak, or the oak tree, was seen as a very important symbol of understanding the three aspects of the human mind. It also was a grounding process. It also drew the students of Irish Druidism and British Druidism to fully understanding the importance of why Mother Nature should be revered without being worshipped in a materialistic way, or a tangible way where you just look at the various trees and shrubs and flowering and non-flowering plants and the fungi and the birds and the mammals and the insects and everything else. They all represented specific archetypes and specific symbolic gestures of the subtle but absolute presence of the universal creator. So you can really understand how this was imprinted into the minds of these students who wanted to learn and wanted to achieve the status of being a druidic priest, whether that was in Ireland or Albion or Britain. So that's the importance of the oak tree. I believe also because of its expanse, its very deep roots, it had a very profound electromagnetic resonance with the telluric electricity coming down from the atmosphere. I think that a lot of these trees and shrubs were specifically actually planted by the Irish Druids and the British Druids. I don't think they just suddenly developed culturally and inherited the Irish wildwood and the British wildwood. I think there was a lot of tree planting and shrub planting that went on by these Irish Druids and British Druids. And obviously, we have to also remember, so there were three main training centres, for want of a better phrase, that were used in Albion or Britain for the 20 years worth of training that was required for any individual, male or female, to achieve the status of becoming a Druidic priest. The first of these was the Isle of Wight, which is in Hampshire in southern England. The second of these was the Isle of Brownsea, which is in Dorset in southwest England. And the third training centre was on the Isle of Man, which is located in the Irish Sea, not far from where Liverpool is in Merseyside, up in northwest England. So it's very interesting. These were remote locations that they had to go to. Then you take a look at the geomagnetic ley lines that are either running through, that are coursing through those small land masses, or are adjacent to those small land masses. And then if you could interconnect that with the various stone circles, the various Druidic monuments.
There's a whole map.
there's a hidden etheric map that can be then realized suddenly by visually looking at that. You start to discern a much deeper, far more profound, supernal and electromagnetic process that was effectively taking place back then.
So the Druids were training to understand how to work with the earth. They were understanding the earth's resonance frequency so they could actually tap into that field and use it to harness energy and power and, develop. That's kind
That
of
is
that.
correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is correct. So, we need to remember that the two main invasions by the Roman Empire that really were designed to disrupt and finally kind of shut down and eradicate British Druidism, and there were aspirations of the Roman Empire to invade the landmass of Ireland and destroy Irish Druidism, which they were never successful in doing. But the first Roman emperor who
Sorry,
did
can
this,
I just say on that?
yeah,
You said about the Irish, they weren't successful in doing that. So Ireland kept a lot of its
that is correct.
sacred
Yes,
energy, right? Sorry, Steve. I
yeah,
have to say this story. We'll come back, but and I know you know about the story, but just telling the audience, an hilarious time when I went to Ireland, we actually went to a location where there was a stone circle and it was in someone's back garden. And the woman she wanted €1 to open the gate and walk in to see the stones. When
yeah,
I asked her if she knew what the stones were, she didn't know
no.
anything historically what they were. She lived in this little town was in the most amazing valley, and the alignment and energy you could feel, it was so beautiful. Still there in the land. The energy of Ireland is still thriving, especially the west
Mm.
coast as well. That is just so alive of.
Oh, Galway and all along the Irish west coast, overlooking
Yeah,
the North Atlantic
beautiful.
Ocean, is a stunning area. With, although again, Western science doesn't accept it, very deep, profound cultural and historical connections to the civilization that apparently existed on what was known as the Atlantean continent. That again is just classed as an aspect of Greek mythology and Greek folklore. But that's we've discussed that previously on many
And there is
occasions.
certainly a connection to Tartaria and Ireland as well.
There
So
is, there is.
100%. Yeah, it's very interesting.
There is
But
absolutely.
not
So,
veering off the subject. So the Romans arrived in Great Britain back.
okay, so there was only a few Roman legions that invaded Britain in 43 AD. That was under instruction from the Roman emperor called Tiberius Claudius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Now, at that time, there was no instructions given for the eradication of the British Druids or rounding up the Celtic Britons and enslaving them to do the bidding of the Roman legions and therefore the Roman Empire. What was impressed was the idea of stationing Roman legions on the landmass of Albion or Britain and steadily culturally influencing the Celtic Britons into accepting that the Roman Empire was in control. There wasn't really any whole-scale warfare or anything, too drastic took place. It wasn't until 54 AD to 55 AD, under the Roman general and the Roman statesman, and as Gaius Julius Caesar, that a
Right.
huge number of Roman legions then were sent in to Albion or Britain as part of the Gallic Wars, which had predominantly been at that time against the mainland Celtic tribes or Gaulish tribes, where France and Belgium and parts of Germany are in Northern Europe today.
Right.
But Britain was seen as the scepter place of great influence, I would say, because they were very aware of the training centres that existed in Albion or Britain, as with Ireland, so that after 20 years of training, the Irish Druids and the British Druids could go out across planet Earth, navigate across the Atlantic Ocean, even the Pacific Ocean, into very remote areas where they would garner much support and influence and admiration from the royal courts of kings and queens, because they only ever actually tried to improve other civilizations. There's nothing that the Irish Druids or the British Druids did in any way that caused the downfall of civilizations. So they didn't see it as relevant. They saw the preservation of knowledge as being the primary concern, and using Mother Nature as a very profound ecological symbolism to convey and express the divine presence of the universal creator in everything that is everywhere, consistently all around us.
Mm.
And that in itself is a very interesting idea.
Mm.
It was a kind of a fusion of, shall we say, European shamanism with aspects of orally conveyed or verbally conveyed scientific endeavor, and combining these different aspects together to develop an individual, male or female Druidic priest, whether it's in Ireland or Albion or Britain, who could then go out across mainland Europe, could positively affect the ways of the civilization that has become known as classical Greece, both in mainland Greece and the Greek islands. Then obviously with the collapse of that civilization, the emergence of the Roman Empire. But again, they were seen as a direct threat because their cultural influences,
they didn't fit the order.
Yeah, and so that is why Gaius Julius Caesar, who was a very astute individual as a Roman general and a Roman statesman, fully recognized that they were a direct threat. And by neutralizing their power, so the destruction of the British Druids really would allow the Roman legions to take full control over the Celtic Britons.
There was a point in Britain where I don't know the date it stopped, but if you actually cut an oak tree down, it was like going against the state because it was such a sacred tree, and that changed. But we also allowed other influences from outside cultures to come in and destroy parts of this ancient Britain, you know. And obviously, Ireland, you've got all the corporations, obviously, as well, that have moved into Ireland and get all the offshore.
If you go to you go to Dublin, you go to London, Derry, you go to Belfast. They're very built up now with all these multinational corporations. It's the removal of the old spiritual essence of Irish Druidism, and there are some very unusual connections between Irish Druidism, British Druidism, the Phoenician Aryans, and the civilization of Atlantis, all of which are never really discussed. But what we know from understanding the old Irish or archaic Irish is there were very similar linguistic and phonetic comparisons that can be made to the earliest forms of the Phoenician language. We're told that obviously that's a Semitic language. But we have to understand that if you have waves of individuals, travelers or immigrants coming into one geographic location over many aeons of time, over many generations, then you have people that interbreed. Obviously, there's a change in genetics and so on. So the original ancestral individuals over time, that were there, we're not going to be the same individuals that 500 years, 600 years later that are still going to be in existence in that specific geographic location.
And we've explained this before in previous podcasts, but this is possibly a reason why people have got so much mental health problems at the moment, because they're so disconnected from actually the essence and their DNA and what they are. And
that's
this,
right.
This isn't so airy fairy as people believe. It makes sense.
So absolutely, and I think when we look at Irish Druidism and British Druidism, they were designed to psychologically maintain, a wonderful sense of balanced and equated mental health amongst the Irish Celtic tribes and the British Celts or the Celtic Britons, respectively. So that in itself is an important thing because that touches on what we look at different aspects of world shamanism. You can see that a lot of mental health issues are actually defined as a form of demonic oppression or a form of demonic possession that's taking place. And obviously we've seen that the idea of demonic oppression and demonic possession have been all completely sidelined now by Western science that's focused on seemingly giving logical and secular answers to everything. It's all psychiatric disorders, it's mental health issues. There's nothing on an electromagnetic or a vibrational level that's taking place connected to the infernal regions of the lower astral. It's all just mental health issues and prescription of various types of pharmaceutical medication to deal with it, or mental health assessments. But the Irish Druids and the British Druids understood fully the multi-dimensional essence of Mother Nature, of planet Earth, the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension that is actually incredibly vibrant, although it looks very tangible and very condensed and solidified. And we have to also remember that the actual etymology of the word druid, we're all told it's connected to the idea of the oak tree. Actually, that is totally incorrect. Its root is from the Gaelic language or the Irish language. So the
Right.
Druids were known in the Irish Gaelic as the Druthiag, the Drouthiag, the Druadiag, and the Driathiag. And all of those four words, for translated into the English language, Druids, means truth servants. So
Nice.
the actual Druids were literally Western occultists and Eastern occultists that passionately and fiercely and discreetly preserved sacred wisdom,
Mm.
and they had an understanding of the occult technology
Yeah.
of planet Earth. They knew how to harness the telluric electricity in the stone circles or the standing stones.
Yeah.
And so, they understood the earth lights. They understood the
Oh,
reason that earth lights had to be seen as important to
yeah.
do with regenerative processes, and therefore medicinal and healing purposes that could be used. And they understood the interplay with electricity in a very different way than we do today. We see, domestic supply or commercial supply of electricity for heating and lighting purposes only,
Mm.
but they fully understood that it could be used for the spiritual development of
Yeah.
themselves. So the Irish Druids and the British Druids fully understood this. We have to fully understand also that the telluric electricity could be used to open dimensional portals in high enough concentrations within these
Wow.
stone monuments or stone circles of the Irish Druids and the British Druids.
Mm.
Again, so they could converse with light beings or perhaps astral spirits from the 4D holographic reality of the astral plane to
Mm.
either share knowledge, to exchange knowledge, and to receive a higher understanding or a higher perspective of the multidimensionality of the material world, and that helped with their own spiritual development over the long term.
And it makes sense with stone circles, the way they're positioned and laid out, that these were some sort of vortex or could have been some sort of vortex. They were certainly very powerful in the way they were used. I mean,
Absolutely, you're
and
totally correct.
bringing
Yes,
it up to date, there's so many remains of them throughout Britain, right up to the top of
incredible.
Scotland,
Yeah,
right the way through. And there would have been hundreds more that built
yes,
other ones. So there was a place where these druids kind of met, like they would have
gathered. Yes, yeah,
meetings. Yeah, like a meeting room, if you like. But
yes.
where was this, like where in England or Britain was this?
Well, before the advent of Christianity was brought into Albion or Britain from mainland Europe, there was traditionally, from all understanding of Welsh folklore, and eventually we can class it as British folklore, there were three Druid arch councils or three Druid high councils that were located in the mainland of Albion. And these were located in the medieval city of Canterbury, where you have obviously Canterbury Cathedral today. The other one was
Oh,
where
yeah, sure.
Westminster Abbey is, in the city of Westminster in central London.
Now that
And the
makes sense.
third
Just
one,
so for people, Westminster Abbey is right next to Parliament. That makes a lot
that
of
is
sense.
correct. Yes.
Mm.
And then the third one was in the city of York, another medieval city. So these were the three locations where the arch druids would meet. So obviously the arch druids, if you like, similar to bishops and so on. If you look at the hierarchy in the Anglican Church or the Church of England here in the United Kingdom of Great Britain, they were in control of other Druidic priests who are obviously both male and female. It wasn't just dominated in some sort of patriarchal communal structure. There was a balance between both the divine patriarchy and the divine matriarchy, both in Irish Druidism and in British Druidism. So they were the three areas, and obviously you see the incredible architectural wonders that are there today with Canterbury Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, and York Abbey or York Cathedral. It's quite incredible.
I think it's interesting because we've actually done the episode on the Faversham Church, St. Mary's of Faversham Church, which that is actually on, seems to be on the same ley line towards Canterbury Cathedral as well.
Yeah,
So
St Mary of
very
Charity
possible.
Church in Faversham is it's on a
Mm.
geomagnetic ley line that connects to Canterbury Cathedral. That is correct.
So you would have had all these meeting places, churches, cathedrals, all dotted around the country, which would have
Yes.
all been aligned to these main centres, Westminster
Well,
Abbey and Canterbury.
it's purported, and again, it's never been fully confirmed, but from studying aspects of Irish folklore and Welsh folklore, we know that Albion or Britain, so just focus on mainland Britain here, we
Yeah.
know that many of the chapels and the smaller churches that are now kind of managed and owned by the Anglican Church or the Church of England, for example, we know that if you go far enough back to the time of the British wildwood, so we're going back before, the invasion of the Roman Empire to Albion or Britain, the Druidic groves and the Druidic shrines where they were constructed, within the British wildwood, these were located on Pacific geomagnetic ley lines. Once all those trees and shrubs were cleared for farmland or other kinds of agricultural processes, the chapels and the small churches were constructed on those Druidic groves and Druidic shrines.
So it was almost like it had to be kept the way it was, but it was almost converted into something else. That's kind of the way I see
Imprinted
it.
over
Yeah.
with what we can class as English Christianity, as it is really now, as it is a Protestant form of Christianity. So
bringing it up today, you do still have Druids around today, and from what I've looked into, apparently there is the Royal Parks in London.
Yes,
There is actually still a Druid that actually looks after them parks. Actually, it makes a lot of sense that we still hold this sacred energy to these land. And anybody visiting London, you can clearly see in these royal parks how powerful the energy is. If you take Hyde Park and around Buckingham Palace, which you'll see an episode publicly on the public channel, you can see that. But it's really special there, and especially Buckingham Palace. Actually, I mean, the waterways around there, the fountains are absolutely beautiful, and that water, I would imagine, is very powerful, very charged water, probably running on some very powerful ley lines.
There's some very interesting sacred geometry in the royal parks of London, whether Richmond Park, obviously Hyde Park, and Regent's Park. And it's interesting that you in Regent's Park you have the outer circle and the inner circle, which are actually terms used in Western occultism and Eastern occultism. So that can also touch on British Druidism.
And obviously during the solstices and equinoxes, Stonehenge. I mean, all the Druids gather there. There is still a British Druid Council, which is very beautiful to know how much these, the crazy people on this planet, follow that. Is interesting. But I mean, do you feel these Druids still serve the same purpose as they did back then?
No, but we do know that a lot of what's become known as Scottish Rite Freemasonry does have clear cultural and, shall we say, technical connections and links with Irish Druidism and British Druidism. There's a lot of comparable elements between both Scottish Rite Freemasonry and Irish Druidism and British Druidism. So in a more contemporary sense in the modern age, I would say a lot of what became known as Freemasonry developed out of Druidism.
That's incredible. Interesting. Yeah, very interesting. And then moving up to Scotland, you've got the Hebrides Islands, which is an incredible location as well. I've visited there as a teenager, and it was you have the Callanish stones and some of the landscapes around that area. I mean, absolutely incredible. There is actually a point on the Callanish stones where the moon will set, and you can actually, it's so large on the horizon, it goes, the moon, when it sets into a woman lying down in the landscape. This is all there. And so
that's the archetype, because obviously you have the solar male and the lunar female. So that's the aspect, is the moon represents the interstellar, or the, shall we say, the spatial connection between the moon as the lunar archetype of the divine female and Mother Nature, and the moon literally entering the womb of the landscape of Mother Nature during the nighttime.
But this is around the planet. You have other
Yes.
locations. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember there was like south of France, northern Spain, southern France, where Dali's house is located.
That's right. Yeah.
Visiting there on the coach ride round, I remember looking back onto the landscape, and I was convinced, really, like there was a woman lying down in the landscape, where the way the
That's
hills were.
amazing. Yes.
But do you think the Druids actually knew how to shape this land, or? But
Yes. They
wow,
did.
okay,
They understood rock formations and the contours and the topography, of the various hills, the various slopes and the dips into the glens and the valleys. They
mm,
understood the importance of the British wildwood. They understood the importance of the different ecology and the environmental resonances, the balance of and the usage of Pacific tree and shrub species. In Pacific settings, everything was carefully interplaced. Everything was carefully balanced, carefully maintained, with great reverence and great respect. And we also know that most of the Irish Druids and the British Druids were either vegetarian or vegan. They, look at the etymology that I've given. The Druids, in the Irish language or the Gaelic language, were seen as the truth servants. They
mm,
literally served that divine understanding, that divine perception. They
yeah,
were there to preserve and cherish fiercely and passionately that sacred wisdom. It was so important
you
for
were,
them
yeah.
to do that.
And I find that as well, because people think there's only one truth, and you can't lie about the truth. Or you can make up lots of lies, but there will always be a point where that truth will be revealed. So
Yeah.
I do not understand the way we have this battle on this planet when the people that are doing the negative actions are
Yeah.
actually, they're gonna hit, as we said before, hit that brick wall all the time, because the truth will always be revealed and the
Yeah.
truth will come out. So that is the way it works on this planet. Throughout Britain, we are riddled with stone circles and megalithic structures, and they're all over.
Mm.
There's a few stone circles in the southeast, but these structures do actually line up and create a map. And Stephen's going to mention some of the main stone circles that we have around the UK. Obviously, we got Stonehenge, but there are
Yes.
many more.
I think we'll start with Ireland first, and then sort of gravitate over to the British Isles. But because I think Ireland, obviously, as we mentioned, it was the Roman Empire never invaded.
Mm,
So Irish Druidism was able to successfully, for many, many generations after the collapse of much of British Druidism, because of what the Roman legions had done in Albion or Britain, were able to preserve a lot of that knowledge orally and verbally
yeah.
to a much later date. And we know that, for example, many of the Irish Druids, they constructed node activators to control the earth lights or telluric electricity.
Wow.
And these were seen, obviously, with the construction of the Drombeg stone circle of County Cork, the Ballino stone circle of County Down, the Kenmare stone circle of County Kerry, and the Beltany stone circle of County Donegal.
Wow.
So they're just a few examples of their own Druidic monuments or Druidic stones that were used for such purposes.
What do you think about the Giant's Causeway and the relation of that to the Druids?
I think it's just that's just a natural geological formation. It does look
Wow.
highly symmetrical, but I believe that there is a connection between that area of Galway in the Irish west coast, and if you go out into the North Atlantic Ocean to where once many thousands of years ago was the Atlantean continent and the Atlantean islands, and there was a geomagnetic ley line that ran through that area or coursed and resonated through that area of Western Ireland out towards that landmass that we're all told never even existed. It's just another story from Greek mythology and Greek folklore and other
They're quite
aspects around
incredible.
the earth.
The Giant's Causeway, the stone structures are pretty magnificent, and you're saying they're a natural formation.
Yes, they are a natural format. I
Wow.
don't believe they were they're artificially constructed at all, because there are other similar geological structures like that in other locations around planet Earth.
Yeah, southern France. There's a few
There you go.
locations.
So I mean, why would the white giants, in the antediluvian period before the Great Flood? Why would they be going around creating these symmetrical structures? In terms of absorbing telluric electricity, these are rock or stone based substances. They're not quartz crystal. So if you geologically, they wouldn't be efficient resonators of the earth lights or the telluric electricity. You have to look at the actual position of where they're based, and these stone circles are obviously all inland. They're not on shorelines or beaches or directly on a coastal area where the actual concentration of telluric energy can build up over time. And obviously you can shape, as you can see with, say, Avebury Circle in Wiltshire, where you have the ground as being excavated out. So that allows the telluric electricity to become earth lights, which is why the British Druids did that with the help of the actual Celtic Britons in that Pacific location.
But just, I know we're going to come back to the other stone circles in Britain, but I just want to say with the Amazon, they have actually discovered they found a stone circle. And obviously the Amazon is absolutely vast. There's so much we haven't not uncovered there. So do you think the Druids got to the Amazon? What do you reckon?
I don't think the Druids did. We know that colonists from on the Atlantean continent and the Atlantean islands, before the final destruction took place, did actually create various crystal cities, shining temples within the landmass that is known today as Brazil. Much of the Amazon jungle did not exist in the way it does today. A lot of it was cleared. And we can obviously see that in other parts of Latin America with the Aztecs and the Mayans, for example. You can see a lot of the actual Mexican jungle was cleared, so they could actually put their stepped pyramids, their ceremonial worship centers in. So no, I wouldn't say that was the case with the Druids. We know that there are connections between the Phoenician Aryans and Brazil. They found many stone monuments there with Phoenician characters carved on them. We also know there's direct cultural and linguistic connections between the Irish Druids, the British Druids, and the Phoenician Aryans. And it's believed that in County Meath, in the Boyne Valley of Eastern Ireland, many remains of ships, perhaps from the antediluvian period, have been found in the silt and the mud, in the Boyne River of that area of Eastern Ireland. A lot of that hasn't been made publicly accessible, but we know that there was direct linguistic and phonetic connections between Old Irish or Archaic Irish and the Phoenician language. And it is believed that the Phoenician language originally was a sacerdotal priesthood language created by the Irish Druids as a way of preserving knowledge. Because if you take the actual letters of the Phoenician alphabet, they are actually made up of 11 of the known constellations that are out there in the Milky Way galaxy. And what they did, those 11 constellations, the star arrangements were split and rotated and linked together. And this has been academically proven to produce specific characters defined as the Phoenician alphabet. So we could therefore say the Phoenician alphabet and therefore the Phoenician language was a shall we say, a stellar language.
And when you mentioned
priests of Ireland,
when you mentioned that, it reminded me of Glastonbury as well. You got the 7 mounds around Glastonbury, which it relies to the Great Bear.
That's right. You had the Glastonbury Zodiac around Glastonbury Tor in that area of Somerset in southwest England. And again, all of that was constructed by the British Druids with the help of the Celtic Britons. But again, if you look at academics from Oxford University and from Cambridge University and elsewhere, none of it is acknowledged as true. No funding is made available for archaeologists to go and do some serious, research and excavations there. But there's many alternative researchers who have clearly shown there is a direct sacred geometry around Glastonbury Tor, obviously St. Michael's Mount and the connections there with the geomagnetic ley lines running through that area of southwest England. And there's connections obviously between the British Druids, King Arthur and Glastonbury Tor. So it's a multifaceted approach that we need to take towards studying both Irish Druidism and British Druidism, because it ultimately is about aspects of Western occultism and Eastern occultism
Mm.
and the occult technology thereof that was regularly used by both by the Irish Druids and the British Druids. And it does appear as though the Roman legions were sent in firstly in 43 AD, then in 54 to 55 AD to really start the process of removing their influence on a cultural and scientific and therefore spiritual level with the Celtic Britons, and to retrieve their various types of occult technology, their teachings, their sacred wisdom, and really reconstitute that within the, shall we say, the indoctrination processes of the Roman Empire.
And the Romans, do you feel that when the Romans arrived, obviously we spoke about this before in the podcast, but the giants were already here when the Romans arrived? And do you think that they would have moving to England over from Ireland? Do you think they would have constructed stone circles like Stonehenge and some of the bigger stone circles that just
Well,
weren't?
we know about in terms of British folklore, the stories connecting Merlin Willets, the
Yeah.
Celtic wizard who really was based on a much older archetypal perceptivity to do with the Irish Druids and the British Druids, but represented as one Pacific individual called Merlin Willets,
Yeah.
which we see emerging in the later aspects of English folklore.
Yeah.
So what we know is that he apparently asked the Celtic giants or the Albion giants if they would be kind enough to help him construct Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain in that area of Wiltshire. So there's a connection there between the Celtic giants or the Albion giants. Some people call them the White Giants, and Merlin Willets. And again, how that connects to King Arthur, who was the British Celtic king, who again is classed as just another aspect of
Mythology done.
British mythology. It's not classed as anything relevant. Same as
That one.
Atlantis, the same as the Phoenicians and the Irish Druids, and the connections with between the Irish Druids and the British Druids and Atlantis. All of this stuff, none of it is really given any real thorough examination and academic discernment. Really, it's quite.
Well, there will be a turning point.
Quite sad. Yeah.
It is sad, but there is a turning point. There is a
There
reason
is,
for
absolutely.
everything. There's always a divine reason. So, that's the way we have to look at it. We're learning. It's deeply frustrating. With the information, when you see stuff and you realize what we had and this beauty and this ability to do this is like, okay, there's no proof in showing it, but like Stephen says, there's English folklore, Irish folklore, lots of folklore all over the world that explain these stories. Is that just a coincidence? Is that, it isn't a sheer coincidence that these are things that are recorded in a way, and they're recorded as folklore because it's not possible to record them as fact, because it doesn't fit a particular narrative that wants to go forward, doesn't it? It makes sense.
That's right.
Now, Steve, just finishing off with regards to some stone circles in Britain. So obviously you've got Stonehenge, which we just mentioned, but the other ones as well. You've got loads along St. Michael's Line.
Yes.
Obviously. But interestingly, actually, in when it hits the East Anglia, there's not many stone circles around Norfolk, and it's very marshy type land.
That's because originally all that was salt marsh, and it was reclaimed from the North Sea and turned into farmland. So it would have been too muddy, too much silt, too much mud. There wasn't the strong foundations. If you come down into southeast England and you look at the county of Kent, there's many Druidic monuments that were constructed during the early Neolithic age. And some of these are the Coldrum Long Barrow, which is also known as the Coldrum Stones, and the Adscombe Stones, nearby to the village of Trotterscliffe in North Kent. We have the Druid monuments such as the Addington Long Barrow and the Chestnuts Long Barrow, which is also known as the Stony Warren and the Long Warren, respectively.
So can you just explain to people that about with long barrows, we are told historically these were just burial chambers.
Yeah.
Right, now there is a truth to that. There were burials made in them. They found archaeological evidence of that. But also these are like little caves that are built into
There
the
were
earth, aren't they?
meditation chambers and prayer chambers as well.
Yes,
And some of them had openings to allow sunlight to come in at a certain angle. So you had early
correct.
morning sunlight, you had sunset as well. So the angle of the solar rays would then literally burst through and light up or illuminate or radiate the inner aspects of these meditation chambers or prayer chambers that we now call long barrows, or we can call them divine earthworks. They connected the resonance of Mother Nature, the womb of the Earth Mother, with various aspects of, shall we say, divine consciousness through the process of meditation and prayer.
Well, Stephen, thank you, my brother. That's amazing. And we are going to go more into the Druids because this is part of our heritage. This is part of who we are. Well, I mean, me and Stephen feel very strong about the Druids, the ancient world, and bringing information to you and helping, letting this information help you develop and grow and become a stronger, empowered person, which we can all become. And we do cover a little bit on ley lines in our book, Mysterious Realities. There's also few little chapters, bits and pieces in the chapters on Druidism in Mysterious Realities, which is available with paperback and ebook in digital form on Amazon. And Stephen, I truly am honored to have you as my brother. Your knowledge is incredible, and every time we have conversations, I develop in my way of thinking, and I know the audience watching this are deeply grateful for all the knowledge you bring to us and them. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And these Sacred Wisdom podcasts are absolutely fantastic. It's a whole process of learning. There's so much to know, and it really is wonderful to bring all this knowledge up and share this with the viewers. It really is.
Brilliant, Steve. And remember, everybody, there is only one truth, and it's a bye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.